The black Bentley pulled up to the small cafe on Michigan Avenue, its tinted windows reflecting the gray Chicago sky. Rafael Torino stepped out, his 7-year-old son Enzo's small hand clutched tightly in his. The boy had been unusually quiet during their drive through downtown, staring out at the bustling streets with eyes that seemed too old for his young face. "Can we get hot chocolate, Dad?" Enzo asked softly, his voice barely audible above the city noise. Rafael nodded, checking his platinum Rolex. They had time before his business meeting. As they walked past the outdoor seating area, Rafael's attention was focused on his phone, scrolling through messages from his associates. He barely glanced at the woman sitting alone at a corner table, her head down, shoulders hunched against the autumn chill. But Enzo stopped walking. His small body went rigid, his eyes fixed on the figure in the worn jacket and faded jeans. The woman's dark hair fell like a curtain around her face, but something about the way she held herself, the familiar curve of her shoulders, made his heart race. "Dad," Enzo whispered, his voice trembling. Rafael looked up from his phone, irritation flashing across his features. "What is it? We need to—" "Dad, that's Mum." The words hit Rafael like a physical blow. His dark eyes followed his son's gaze to the woman at the table, and his world tilted on its axis. There, looking fragile and lost, sat Alessandra, the woman he'd let walk away 3 weeks ago, the woman he loved more than his own life. 3 weeks earlier, Alessandra Torino had made the most difficult decision of her life. Standing in the marble foyer of their Lincoln Park mansion, her suitcase in hand, she'd looked into the dark eyes of the man she'd loved for 8 years and told him she couldn't do it anymore. "I can't raise Enzo in this world, Rafael," she'd said, her voice steady despite the tears streaming down her face. "He's starting to ask questions about why men in suits come to the house at all hours, why you carry a gun, why other kids' fathers don't have bodyguards." Rafael had stood frozen, his white dress shirt unbuttoned at the top, revealing the muscular chest and the small elegant tattoo on the side of his neck, a reminder of his family's legacy. His platinum Rolex caught the light as he clenched his fists, every instinct screaming at him to fight, to convince her to stay. But he'd seen the determination in her green eyes, the same fierce protectiveness that had made him fall in love with her in the first place. She wasn't leaving because she didn't love him. She was leaving because she loved their son more than her own happiness. "Where will you go?" he'd asked quietly, his Italian accent thickening with emotion. "I'll figure it out," Alessandra had replied, kneeling down to hug Enzo, who was playing with his toy cars in the living room, oblivious to the fact that his world was about to shatter. "I'll get a job, find an apartment. When I'm stable, I'll come back for him." Rafael had wanted to argue, to tell her that she didn't understand how the world worked, that leaving his protection would put her in danger. But he'd respected her choice because that's what love meant, sometimes letting go of what you treasured most. "I won't stop you," he'd said finally, "but if you need anything—" "I won't," she'd cut him off gently. "I need to do this on my own." Now, 3 weeks later, Rafael was learning what it meant to be a single father. Enzo had cried for his mother every night for the first week, asking when she was coming home. Rafael had told him that Mommy needed some time away, that she still loved him very much. He'd hired the best nanny money could buy, but no one could replace Alessandra's gentle touch, her bedtime stories, her way of making everything better with just a smile. The house felt empty without her laughter echoing through the halls. Rafael threw himself into work, expanding his territory on the south side, making deals that brought in more money than he could spend in a lifetime. But none of it mattered without his family intact. Carlos, his most trusted associate, had offered to track Alessandra down, to bring her home. Rafael had refused. If she wanted to come back, it had to be her choice. "Boss, the kid's not eating again," Carlos reported one morning, finding Rafael in his home office, staring at family photos on his desk. Rafael looked up, noting the concern in his assistant's weathered face. Carlos had been with the Torino family for 15 years, had watched Enzo grow from a baby to the bright, curious boy he was now. "What did the nanny try?" Rafael asked, setting down the photo of Alessandra holding newborn Enzo in the hospital. "Everything. Pancakes, cereal, even ice cream for breakfast. He just pushes it around his plate and asks for his mama." Rafael's jaw tightened. He'd built an empire through strength and ruthlessness, But he was powerless against his son's heartbreak. "I'll talk to him." He found Enzo in his bedroom, sitting by the window that overlooked the garden where Alessandra used to read to him under the oak tree. The boy's dark hair, so much like his father's, fell across his forehead as he pressed his small hands against the glass. "Hey, buddy," Raphael said softly, sitting on the edge of the bed. "Carlos says you're not hungry." Enzo turned, and Raphael's heart broke at the sadness in his son's brown eyes. "When is Mama coming home?" It was the same question every day, and Raphael still didn't have a good answer. "I don't know, Enzo, but I know she loves you very much." "Then why did she leave?" The question was asked with the brutal honesty of childhood. Raphael pulled his son onto his lap, breathing in the familiar scent of his shampoo. "Sometimes grown-ups have to make hard choices. Your mama thought it would be better for you if she went away for a while." "But I want her here," Enzo whispered, burying his face in his father's chest. "I know, son, I want her here too." That afternoon, Raphael made a decision that surprised even himself. Instead of sending Carlos to pick up Enzo from his private school in River North, he went himself. As they drove through downtown Chicago, Enzo pressed his face to the window, watching the crowds of people hurrying along the sidewalks. "Dad, can we stop somewhere?" Enzo asked suddenly. "I want hot chocolate." Raphael glanced at his son in the rearview mirror. It was the first time in weeks that Enzo had asked for anything. "Of course, where would you like to go?" "That place," Enzo pointed to a small cafe with outdoor seating. "It looks cozy." Raphael pulled over, checking his watch. He had a meeting with his lawyers in an hour, but Enzo's request was more important than any business deal. They walked toward the cafe entrance, Raphael's trained eyes automatically scanning the area for threats, a habit that had kept him alive in a dangerous world. He was so focused on his phone, reading an urgent message from Franco about the restaurant investments he'd been considering, that he almost missed the moment that would change everything. But Enzo saw her first. Alessandra sat at the small metal table, her hands wrapped around a cup of coffee that had long since gone cold. The October wind cut through her thin jacket, but she couldn't afford to go inside and order something else. The $5 she'd spent on the coffee was money she couldn't spare, but she'd needed somewhere to sit, somewhere to think. The past 3 weeks had been the hardest of her life. She'd naively believed that leaving Raphael's world would be like stepping into freedom, but reality had hit her with brutal force. Without references from previous employment, she'd never needed to work while married to Raphael, and with a gap in her resume that she couldn't explain, finding a job had proved impossible. The small amount of money she'd saved from her household allowance was nearly gone. She'd been staying in a cheap motel on the outskirts of the city, but even that was becoming unaffordable. Last night, she'd walked the streets until dawn, too proud to call the one person who could help her, too stubborn to admit that maybe she'd made a terrible mistake. Her phone, a basic model she'd bought to replace the expensive smartphone Raphael had given her, buzzed with a text from Sarah. The only friend who'd stayed in touch after her marriage to Raphael had isolated her from her old life. "How are you holding up? Do you need anything?" Alessandra stared at the message, her fingers hovering over the keypad. Sarah worked as a teacher at a public school, barely making ends meet herself. She couldn't ask her friend for money, couldn't drag her into the mess she'd made of her life. "I'm fine. Starting a new job next week," she typed back, hating herself for the lie. She was so lost in her thoughts that she didn't notice the black Bentley pulling up to the curb, didn't see the man in the expensive suit stepping out with a small boy at his side. It wasn't until she heard the voice, that sweet, familiar voice that haunted her dreams, that she looked up. "Dad, that's Mom." The words hit her like a physical blow. She raised her head slowly, her heart stopping as she saw Enzo standing 10 feet away, his brown eyes wide with recognition and joy. Behind him, Raphael stood frozen, his face a mask of shock and something else. Relief, maybe, or pain. For a moment, nobody moved. Alessandra drank in the sight of her son, noting how he'd grown in just 3 weeks, how his school uniform was perfectly pressed, how his hair had been recently cut. Raphael was taking good care of him, she realized, with a mixture of gratitude and heartbreak. Then Enzo broke free from his father's grip and ran toward her. "Mama!" he cried, throwing himself into her arms with such force that her chair nearly tipped backward. Alessandra caught him, pulling him tight against her chest, breathing in his familiar scent. Tears streamed down her face as she felt his small arms wrap around her neck, felt his body trembling with emotion. "I missed you so much," Enzo whispered against her ear. "Why did you go away? Why didn't you take me with you?" "Oh, baby," Alessandra managed, her voice breaking. "I missed you too, every single day." She looked up to find Raphael approaching slowly, his dark eyes unreadable. He looked exactly the same. Devastatingly handsome in his tailored black suit, the white dress shirt open at the collar revealing the strong column of his throat and the edge of his tattoo. His platinum Rolex caught the afternoon light as he moved, every inch of him radiating the power and danger that had both attracted and terrified her. But there was something different in his expression, a vulnerability she'd rarely seen in all their years together. "Alessandra," he said quietly, his voice carefully controlled. "Raphael." She couldn't bring herself to let go of Enzo, couldn't bear the thought of this moment ending. "You look—" He paused, taking in her appearance, the worn clothes, the weight she'd lost, the exhaustion in her green eyes. "Are you okay?" The simple question nearly undid her. She wanted to lie, to maintain her pride, to pretend that leaving had been the right choice. But looking at her son's face, seeing the hope and confusion there, she couldn't find the words. "Mama, are you coming home now?" Enzo asked, pulling back to look at her face. "I've been waiting for you. Dad said you needed time away, but it's been forever." Alessandra's heart shattered. She looked at Raphael, seeing her own pain reflected in his dark eyes. "Enzo, sweetheart, it's complicated." "No, it's not," Enzo interrupted with the simple logic of childhood. "You're my mama and I need you. Dad needs you too, even though he pretends he doesn't." Raphael's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Enzo, your mother has her own life now." "No, she doesn't," Enzo said firmly, looking between his parents with the wisdom that sometimes came from innocence. "She's sad, I can see it. And you're sad too, Dad. You think I don't notice, but I do." The truth of their son's words hung in the air like a challenge. Alessandra felt Raphael's gaze on her, intense and searching. She knew he was seeing through her facade, recognizing the signs of her struggle that she'd tried so hard to hide. "Where are you staying?" Raphael asked quietly. Alessandra hesitated. The motel room she could no longer afford, the park bench where she'd spent last night. "I'm between places right now." Understanding flickered in Raphael's eyes. "You don't have anywhere to go?" It wasn't a question, and Alessandra felt her cheeks burn with shame. She'd been so determined to prove she could make it on her own, so convinced that leaving his world would lead to something better. Instead, she'd discovered that the real world was harsher than she'd imagined, that her privileged life with Raphael had left her unprepared for the struggles of ordinary people. "I'll figure something out," she said, trying to sound more confident than she felt. "Mama, please come home," Enzo pleaded, his small hands gripping her jacket. "I promise I'll be good. I'll eat all my vegetables and do my homework without complaining. Just please don't leave again." The desperation in her son's voice broke something inside Alessandra. She looked at Raphael, seeing the internal struggle playing out across his features. He could force the issue, she knew. He had the power and resources to take Enzo and disappear, to make sure she never saw her son again. But that wasn't who he was, not when it came to family. "What do you want, Alessandra?" Raphael asked, his voice gentle despite the tension radiating from his body. "Tell me what you need." The question was loaded with meaning. What did she want? To raise her son away from violence and danger? To build a life based on honesty and safety? To have the man she loved choose family over power? "I want—" she began, then stopped, overwhelmed by the impossibility of it all. "Just come home," Enzo whispered. "We can figure everything else out later." Raphael watched the internal battle playing out across Alessandra's face and felt his heart clench with a mixture of love and helplessness. She looked so fragile sitting there, holding their son like he was her lifeline. The proud, strong woman who had walked out of their mansion 3 weeks ago had been worn down by the harsh realities of life outside his protection. "There's a coffee shop across the street," he said quietly. "Why don't we go somewhere warmer to talk?" Alessandra nodded, not trusting her voice. She stood slowly, Enzo's hand firmly clasped in hers, and followed Raphael across Michigan Avenue to a small Italian cafe that reminded her painfully of their early days together, when he would take her to little family-owned restaurants in Little Italy and tell her stories about his grandmother's cooking. Raphael chose a corner booth away from other customers, his trained instinct still alert for potential threats, even in this moment of personal crisis. He ordered hot chocolate for Enzo and coffee for himself and Alessandra, then sat back and studied his wife's face. "Tell me what happened," he said simply. Alessandra wrapped her hands around the warm mug, gathering her courage. "I thought it would be easier," she admitted. "I thought I could get a job, find an apartment, build a normal life, but no one wants to hire someone with no work experience and a 7-year gap in their resume. You could have used my name, my connections. That would have defeated the purpose," she interrupted. "I wanted to do this on my own to prove that I could survive without—" She gestured vaguely, encompassing everything he represented, the money, the power, the dangerous world that had shaped their lives. Raphael leaned forward, his voice low and intense. "And what did you prove, Alessandra? That pride is more important than our son's happiness? That your principles matter more than family?" The words stung because they held a grain of truth. "I proved that I was naive," she said quietly. "I proved that I don't know how to live in the real world." "Mama," Enzo said, tugging on her sleeve, "can we go home now? I want to show you my new drawings. I made one of our family, but I couldn't finish it because you weren't there." The simple statement hit both parents like a physical blow. Raphael saw Alessandra's composure crack, saw the tears she was fighting to hold back. "Enzo, why don't you go pick out a cookie from the display case?" Raphael suggested, handing his son a $20 bill. "Take your time choosing." When they were alone, Raphael reached across the table and covered Alessandra's hand with his. She didn't pull away, and he took that as a small victory. "I never wanted you to suffer," he said quietly. "When you left, I respected your decision because I love you, but seeing you like this—" He paused, his jaw tightening. "It's killing me." "I can't come back to the same life, Raphael," Alessandra whispered. "I can't pretend anymore that what you do is okay, that I can raise our son in that world. Then we'll change it." The words hung between them, simple and revolutionary. Alessandra stared at him, searching his face for any sign of deception. "What do you mean?" Raphael was quiet for a long moment, watching Enzo carefully examine the pastries in the display case. "I've been thinking about what you said before you left. About Enzo asking questions. About the kind of man I want him to become." He turned back to her, his dark eyes serious. "I don't want him to follow in my footsteps. I never did. But your family, your responsibilities, can be handled by others," Raphael finished. "I've been building legitimate businesses for years, Alessandra. The restaurants, the construction company, the real estate investments. I have enough clean money to last several lifetimes." Alessandra felt a flicker of hope, dangerous and fragile. "You're talking about leaving?" "Completely. I'm talking about choosing what matters most," Raphael said, his thumb stroking across her knuckles. "I built an empire to provide for my family, to protect the people I love. But what good is any of it if I lose you in the process?" "It's not that simple," Alessandra protested. "People don't just walk away from your world. There are consequences. Enemies who would see it as weakness." "Let me worry about that," Raphael said firmly. "I've been planning an exit strategy for months. Franco has been helping me transition the restaurants to full legitimacy. Robert, my lawyer, has been setting up trusts and legal structures to distance me from the family business." Alessandra's eyes widened. "You've been planning this since before I left." "I've been planning this since the day Enzo was born," Raphael admitted. "I just didn't know how to make the transition without putting you both at risk. Your leaving forced my hand, made me realize that the biggest risk was losing my family." Enzo returned to the table, clutching a chocolate chip cookie and grinning. "They let me have an extra one for free because I told them it was for my mama," he announced proudly. "That's very sweet, baby," Alessandra said, accepting the cookie with a trembling smile. "So, are we going home now?" Enzo asked, climbing back into the booth next to his father. Can Mama come to my soccer game on Saturday? I scored 2 goals last week, but you weren't there to see. The casual mention of missed moments hit Alessandra like a punch to the gut. She'd been so focused on her principles, on doing what she thought was right, that she'd missed precious time with her son that she could never get back. I want to come home, she whispered, the words torn from her heart. But I need to know that things will really change. I need to know that you're serious about leaving that life behind. Raphael reached into his jacket and pulled out a manila envelope. Franco found a property in Naperville, he said, sliding the papers across the table. It's a house in a good school district, far enough from the city to be safe, close enough for me to commute to the legitimate businesses. I put an offer in yesterday. Alessandra stared at the real estate listing, seeing the photos of a beautiful colonial house with a large backyard, a swing set, white picket fence. It looked like something from a magazine about suburban family life, so different from their Lincoln Park mansion with its security cameras and bulletproof windows. You did this before you knew if I'd come back? She asked. I did it because I hoped you would, Raphael said simply, because I realized that I'd rather have a small, honest life with you than all the power in the world without you. What about Carlos, Franco, the people who depend on you? Carlos is retiring to Florida with a generous pension. Franco will run the restaurant chain. He's always been more interested in the food business than anything else. The others. Raphael shrugged. They'll find new leadership. The Torino name will fade from the streets, and that's exactly what I want. Enzo looked between his parents with growing excitement. Does this mean we're going to be a normal family? Like Tommy's family at school? Raphael smiled, the expression transforming his usually serious face. We're going to try, son. Would you like that? Yes, Enzo exclaimed, then turned to his mother with pleading eyes. Mama, please say yes. Please come home with us. Alessandra looked at the house listing again, then at her husband's face, seeing the sincerity there, the love that had never wavered despite everything they'd been through. She thought about the cold motel room, the empty nights without her son's laughter, the crushing loneliness of trying to build a life without the 2 people who mattered most. Okay, she whispered, then stronger. Okay, let's go home. Enzo whooped with joy, throwing his arms around both his parents. Raphael's hand found hers across the table, his fingers intertwining with hers, in a gesture that felt like a promise, like a new beginning. But as they prepared to leave the cafe, Alessandra couldn't shake the feeling that walking away from Raphael's world wouldn't be as simple as signing papers and moving to the suburbs. Some shadows once cast were difficult to escape. The Lincoln Park mansion felt different when they returned that evening. Alessandra walked through the familiar rooms with new eyes, seeing the subtle signs of Raphael's world that she'd grown accustomed to over the years. The security system that was more sophisticated than most banks, the reinforced windows, the way Carlos and other associates spoke in code when they thought she wasn't listening. Enzo had fallen asleep in the car, exhausted by the emotional reunion, and Raphael carried him upstairs to his bedroom. Alessandra followed, her heart aching as she tucked her son into bed and kissed his forehead. He looked so peaceful, so innocent, and she was more determined than ever to give him the normal childhood he deserved. He missed you terribly, Raphael said quietly, as they stood in the doorway watching Enzo sleep. Every night he would ask when you were coming home. I missed him too, Alessandra replied, her voice thick with emotion. I missed both of you. They went downstairs to Raphael's study, where he poured himself a glass of whiskey and offered her wine. The room was exactly as she remembered, dark wood paneling, leather furniture, and the massive desk where Raphael conducted business she'd never wanted to know about. Tell me about your plan, she said, settling into the chair across from his desk. How do we really make this work? Raphael loosened his tie and unbuttoned his shirt cuffs, the gesture so familiar it made her heart ache. I've been liquidating assets for months, he began, pulling out a thick folder. The legitimate businesses are profitable enough to support us comfortably. The house in Naperville is just the beginning. I want to move our entire life away from this world. And the family business? Will continue without me. My cousin Vincent has been eager to take over for years. He has the temperament for it, the connections. I'll make the transition gradual, step back slowly until I'm just a silent partner, then eventually cut ties completely. Alessandra studied his face, looking for any sign of doubt or regret. You're really willing to give up everything you've built? I'm not giving up everything, Raphael said, his dark eyes intense. I'm choosing what matters most. You and Enzo are my legacy, not some criminal empire. The conviction in his voice made her believe for the first time that this could actually work. They spent the next hour going over details, the timeline for the move, the transition of his businesses, the security measures that would need to remain in place during the changeover. There's something else, Raphael said as they prepared to go upstairs. Sarah called while you were gone. She was worried about you. Alessandra felt a stab of guilt. I lied to her, told her I was fine, that I had a job. She didn't believe you. She's a good friend, Alessandra. When we move to Naperville, maybe you could reconnect with her properly. Build the kind of friendships you had before. Before I married a Mafia boss? She finished with a rueful smile. Before you isolated yourself to protect the people you cared about, Raphael corrected gently. That was my fault, not yours. I should have found a way to keep you connected to your old life. They were interrupted by a knock at the front door. Raphael's expression immediately shifted, becoming alert and dangerous. It was nearly midnight. No legitimate visitor would come calling at this hour. Stay here, he ordered, reaching for the gun he kept in his desk drawer. Raphael, no, Alessandra protested, fear flooding through her. This is exactly what I'm talking about. This is why I can't— It's probably nothing, he said, but his body language suggested otherwise. Carlos is supposed to be watching the house if someone got past him. The knock came again, more insistent this time. Raphael moved toward the door and Alessandra followed despite his protests. Through the security monitor, they could see a figure in a dark coat, face obscured by shadows. Raphael opened the door with the chain still attached, his gun hidden behind his back. Vincent, what are you doing here? Vincent Romano pushed through the door before Raphael could stop him, his eyes wild with anger and something else, desperation maybe, or fear. We need to talk, Vincent said, then stopped short when he saw Alessandra. Well, well, look who decided to come crawling back. Vincent, Raphael warned, his voice deadly quiet. No, this is perfect, Vincent continued, his words slightly slurred. Alessandra could smell alcohol on his breath, could see the reckless gleam in his eyes that meant trouble. I was coming to tell you about the problems your little retirement plan is causing, but now I see the real problem. Your wife comes home, and suddenly you think you can just walk away from your responsibilities. My responsibilities are to my family, Raphael said, stepping protectively in front of Alessandra. Your responsibilities are to the people who've bled for you, who've built this empire with you, Vincent snarled. You think you can just hand everything over to me and disappear to the suburbs? You think it's that simple? That's exactly what I think, Raphael replied calmly. And if you have a problem with that arrangement, we can discuss it tomorrow when you're sober. I'm sober enough to see what's happening here, Vincent said, his gaze shifting to Alessandra with undisguised contempt. Your precious wife runs away because she can't handle the heat, and now she's back to drag you down with her. You're going soft, Raphael. People are starting to notice. Get out, Raphael said, his hand moving toward his weapon. Or what? You'll shoot your own cousin. Your business partner? Vincent laughed bitterly. Face it, Raphael, you can't just walk away from this life. It follows you wherever you go. And when it catches up to you in your perfect little suburban house, what then? When your enemies figure out where you live? When they come for your family, will your normal life protect them? The words hit their target. Alessandra felt the familiar fear creeping back, the knowledge that Raphael's world was full of people who would see his retirement as weakness, his family as targets. That's enough, Raphael said, but Vincent wasn't finished. Ask her, Vincent said, pointing at Alessandra. Ask your wife if she really thinks you can leave this behind. Ask her if she's willing to bet your son's life on it. Vincent, I'm warning you, the Kozlovs are expanding their territory, Vincent interrupted, his voice taking on a more serious tone. Elena Kozlov specifically asked about you last week. Wanted to know if the rumors about you going soft were true. I told her no, that Rafael Torino would never abandon his family's legacy. But now. He gestured around the room, taking in the domestic scene, Alessandra in her simple clothes, Raphael without his usual entourage of bodyguards. Now I'm not so sure. Maybe Elena was right. Maybe you have gone soft. The mention of Elena Kozlov sent a chill through the room. She was the head of the Russian mob in Chicago, ruthless and ambitious, and she'd been looking for an excuse to move against the Italian families for years. Elena Kozlov is not your concern, Raphael said, but Alessandra could hear the tension in his voice. She is, when she's asking questions about your family, Vincent shot back. She is when she's wondering if your beautiful wife and son might be easier targets than you are. The threat hung in the air like poison. Alessandra felt her carefully rebuilt hope crumbling, felt the weight of Raphael's world pressing down on them once again. "Get out of my house," Raphael said, his voice deadly quiet. "Now." Vincent smiled coldly, but moved toward the door. "Think about what I said, cousin. Think about whether your family's safety is worth your pride." When the door closed behind him, the silence was deafening. Alessandra sank into a chair, her hands shaking. "He's trying to manipulate us," Raphael said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Is he?" Alessandra asked quietly. "Or is he telling the truth? Can you really just walk away from this, Raphael? Can we really be safe?" Raphael knelt beside her chair, taking her hands in his. "I won't let anyone hurt you or Enzo, I swear to you." "You can't control everything," Alessandra whispered. "You can't protect us from the consequences of choices you made before we were even born." The truth of her words settled between them like a wall. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the bulletproof windows of their fortress-like home, reminding them both that some prisons were built as much to keep the world out as to keep them in. The next morning brought an unseasonably warm October day, but the sunshine couldn't penetrate the tension that had settled over the Torino household. Alessandra had barely slept, Vincent's words echoing in her mind. Raphael had spent most of the night on the phone with Carlos and Franco, implementing additional security measures and trying to assess the real threat level. Enzo, blissfully unaware of the adult complications surrounding his family's reunion, was simply happy to have his mother back. He chatted excitedly over breakfast about his upcoming soccer game, his new teacher, and the Halloween costume he wanted her to help him make. "Can we go to the pumpkin patch this weekend?" he asked, syrup from his pancakes sticky on his chin. "Tommy's family goes every year, and they said I could come with them, but I'd rather go with you and Dad." Alessandra's heart clenched at the normalcy of the request, at the simple childhood joy that seemed so fragile in their complicated world. "Of course, sweetheart. We'll make it a family day." Raphael caught her eye across the table, and she saw her own thoughts reflected there, the desperate desire to give their son these ordinary moments and the fear that Vincent's visit had shattered any possibility of a peaceful transition. After Enzo left for school with his bodyguard, a precaution that had become routine years ago, Raphael and Alessandra sat in the kitchen, the weight of unspoken concerns heavy between them. "I've been thinking about what Vincent said," Alessandra began carefully. "Vincent was drunk and angry," Raphael interrupted. "He's been waiting for years to take over, and now that it's finally happening, he's scared, he's lashing out." "But what if he's right about the Kozlovs? What if leaving makes us more vulnerable, not less?" Raphael was quiet for a long moment, his fingers drumming against the marble countertop. "There are always risks, Alessandra. Staying in this life carries risks. Leaving carries different risks. The question is which ones we're willing to live with." Before she could respond, Carlos appeared in the doorway, his expression grim. "Boss, we have a problem." Raphael's posture immediately shifted, becoming alert and dangerous. "What kind of problem?" "Elena Kozlov's people were asking questions at Enzo's school this morning. The principal called. Apparently someone claiming to be a journalist was trying to get information about the students, specifically asking about any children from prominent local families." The blood drained from Alessandra's face. "They're targeting Enzo?" "We don't know that for sure," Raphael said, but his jaw was tight with barely controlled fury. "Carlos, double the security at the school. I want our people there around the clock." "Already done, boss. But there's more." Carlos glanced at Alessandra, then back to Raphael. Vincent's been talking. Word is getting around that you're planning to step down, that you're going soft. Some of the other families are seeing it as an opportunity." "An opportunity for what?" Alessandra asked, though she dreaded the answer. "To move against us while we're perceived as weak," Raphael explained, his voice deadly calm. "To take over our territory, our businesses, our connections. So Vincent was right," Alessandra said quietly. "Leaving does make us targets. Staying makes us targets too," Raphael pointed out. "At least if we leave, we have a chance at a normal life." "Do we?" Alessandra stood up, pacing to the window that overlooked their garden. "Or do we just become sitting ducks in a suburban house with no protection?" The question hung in the air, highlighting the impossible choice they faced. Stay in Raphael's world and raise their son surrounded by violence and danger, or leave and potentially put him at even greater risk from enemies seeking revenge. Raphael's phone buzzed with a text message. He read it, his expression darkening further. "What is it?" Alessandra asked. "Franco. The restaurant in Little Italy was vandalized last night. Windows broken, graffiti on the walls. The message was clear. This is what happens when the Torinos show weakness." Alessandra felt her carefully constructed hope crumbling. "They're not going to let you leave, are they?" "They don't have a choice in the matter," Raphael said, his voice carrying the steel that had made him feared throughout Chicago. "But they're going to make it as difficult as possible." "And Enzo gets caught in the middle," Alessandra whispered. Raphael crossed the room to her, pulling her into his arms. She could feel the tension in his body, could sense the internal war between his desire to protect his family and his determination to leave the criminal world behind. "We'll figure this out," he murmured against her hair. "I won't let them hurt you or Enzo. I swear it." "How?" Alessandra pulled back to look at him. "How do we protect him from this? How do we give him a normal life when your past keeps following us?" Before Raphael could answer, his phone rang. The caller ID showed Robert, his lawyer. "Raphael, we have a serious problem." Robert's voice was tense even through the speaker. "I just got word that the FBI is reopening their investigation into your family's activities. Someone's been feeding them information, detailed information about your operations going back years." "Vincent," Raphael said immediately. "That's my guess. He's trying to force your hand, make it impossible for you to retire quietly. If the feds build a case against you, you'll have to stay active to fight it, which means you can't step down." Alessandra felt the walls closing in around them. Every path forward seemed blocked, every choice leading to more danger for their family. "There's something else," Robert continued. "Elena Kozlov's lawyer contacted me this morning. She wants a meeting, says she has a proposition that might interest you." "Absolutely not," Raphael said immediately. "Raphael, you should hear what she has to say. She's offering a truce, a way for you to step down without appearing weak to the other families." "At what cost?" Raphael asked, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer wouldn't be good. "She wants a percentage of your legitimate businesses, ongoing payments that would essentially make you a junior partner in your own empire. In exchange, she guarantees your family's safety and smooth transition out of the life." "Extortion," Raphael said flatly. "Protection," Robert corrected. "It's not ideal, but it might be the only way to ensure your family's safety while you make the transition." Alessandra listened to the conversation with growing horror. This was exactly what she'd feared, that Raphael's world would never truly let them go, that there would always be someone demanding payment, threatening their peace. "I need time to think," Raphael said finally. "You don't have much time," Robert warned. "Vincent's feeding information to the feds, Elena's making moves, and the other families are watching to see how you respond. Every day you delay makes the situation more dangerous." After Raphael hung up, the silence in the kitchen was deafening. Alessandra stared out at the garden, where she'd once imagined raising their children in safety, and felt the dream slipping away. "Maybe I should leave again," she said quietly. "Take Enzo and disappear. If we're not here, you won't have to worry about protecting us. You can handle your business without—" "No." Raphael's voice was sharp, final. "We're not running anymore. We're not splitting up our family again." "Then what do we do?" Raphael was quiet for a long moment. his dark eyes distant as he considered their options. When he spoke, his voice carried a determination that both thrilled and terrified her. "We end this, once and for all." "What do you mean?" "I mean we stop playing defense. Vincent wants to force me to stay. Elena wants to extort me. The feds want to build a case." Raphael's smile was cold and dangerous. "Fine. Let's give them all something to really worry about." "Raphael, no, whatever you're thinking. I'm thinking that I've been trying to leave this world quietly, respectfully, but maybe quiet isn't an option. Maybe the only way out is through." Alessandra felt a chill of fear. She recognized the look in Raphael's eyes, the calculating coldness that had made him one of the most feared men in Chicago. "You're talking about war." "I'm talking about ending a war before it starts," Raphael corrected. "About making it clear to everyone, Vincent, Elena, the feds, the other families, that Raphael Torino chooses when and how he leaves this life, not them. And if you're wrong, if this escalates instead of ending it—" Raphael cupped her face in his hands, his touch gentle despite the steel in his voice. "Then at least we'll go down fighting together, as a family. But I won't spend the rest of our lives looking over our shoulders, paying tribute to people who think they own us." Outside, a car pulled into their driveway, Carlos returning with Enzo from school. Their son would be home soon, full of stories about his day, innocent of the dangerous game being played around him. "1 week?" Raphael said, his decision made. "Give me 1 week to clean this up, and then we move to Naperville as planned. No more threats, no more extortion, no more looking back." Alessandra wanted to argue, wanted to beg him to find another way. But looking into his eyes, she saw the man she'd fallen in love with. Dangerous, yes, but also fiercely protective of the people he loved. And maybe, just maybe, he was right. Maybe the only way to truly leave Raphael's world was to remind everyone why they'd feared him in the first place. 1 week, she agreed, praying it wouldn't be the last week they had as a family. 2 years later, the autumn sun streamed through the windows of their colonial house in Naperville, casting warm light across the kitchen where Alessandra was helping Enzo with his homework. The sounds of suburban life drifted in from outside, children playing, lawnmowers humming, dogs barking in the distance. "Mom, can you help me with this math problem?" Enzo asked, his brow furrowed in concentration. "Of course, sweetheart," Alessandra replied, settling beside him at the kitchen table that had become the heart of their new life. The past 2 years had been everything she'd dreamed of and more. True to his word, Raphael had handled the threats to their family with swift, decisive action. Vincent had found himself facing federal charges for his cooperation with the FBI, charges that mysteriously appeared just as he thought he was gaining the upper hand. Elena Kozlov had accepted Raphael's counteroffer, a one-time payment that was substantial enough to satisfy her greed, but final enough to end any future claims on his family. The transition hadn't been without its challenges, but Raphael had proven that when he made a decision, he followed through completely. The legitimate businesses were thriving under Franco's management, providing more than enough income to support their comfortable suburban lifestyle. Raphael had kept his word about leaving the criminal world behind, though Alessandra sometimes caught glimpses of the man he used to be, the way his eyes would scan a room when they entered a restaurant, the unconscious authority in his voice when dealing with contractors or business associates. "Dad's home," Enzo announced, jumping up from his homework as they heard Raphael's car in the driveway. Raphael entered through the garage, loosening his tie as he came into the kitchen. He looked tired but content, the stress lines that had once marked his face softened by 2 years of legitimate business and family dinners. "How was your day?" Alessandra asked, accepting his kiss and breathing in the familiar scent of his cologne. "Good. The new restaurant location is coming along ahead of schedule. Franco thinks we'll be able to open by Christmas." He ruffled Enzo's hair. "How was school, buddy?" "Great. I made the travel soccer team, and Mrs. Peterson said my science project was the best in the class," Enzo said proudly. "That's my boy," Raphael said, the pride in his voice unmistakable. As they sat down to dinner, a simple meal of pasta and salad that Alessandra had prepared, she marveled at how normal their life had become. Enzo chatted about his friends, his teachers, his plans for the weekend. Raphael talked about expanding the restaurant chain, about the cooking classes he was considering taking with Franco. They were just a family, living an ordinary life in an ordinary suburb. "Oh, I almost forgot," Raphael said, reaching into his jacket pocket. "Sarah called. She and her husband want to come for dinner this weekend. She said something about wanting to see how domestic I've become." Alessandra laughed. Her friendship with Sarah had been one of the unexpected gifts of their new life. Without the barriers that Raphael's criminal activities had created, she'd been able to reconnect with old friends and make new ones in their neighborhood. "I'll cook," Raphael offered. "That lasagna recipe Franco taught me." "You sure you can handle it without burning down the kitchen?" Alessandra teased. "Hey, I've only had 2 minor incidents," Raphael protested, grinning. "And the fire department said the second one barely counted as an emergency." Enzo giggled. "Remember when Dad tried to make pancakes and they stuck to the ceiling?" "We agreed never to speak of that again," Raphael said solemnly, but his eyes were twinkling with amusement. Later that evening, after Enzo had gone to bed, Raphael and Alessandra sat on their back porch, watching the stars appear in the clear suburban sky. It was a far cry from the bulletproof windows and armed guards of their old life, but it was theirs, peaceful, honest, and safe. "Do you ever miss it?" Alessandra asked quietly. "The power, the respect, the excitement." Raphael considered the question seriously. "Sometimes I miss the simplicity of it," he admitted. "When someone crossed me, I dealt with it directly. Now I have to navigate building permits and health inspectors and customer complaints." He smiled. "But I don't miss the fear. I don't miss wondering if every phone call might be the one telling me that someone I love was hurt because of choices I made." "And you don't regret giving it all up?" "How could I regret this?" Raphael gestured toward the house where their son slept peacefully, toward the quiet street where their neighbors lived normal, uncomplicated lives. "I traded an empire built on fear for a family built on love. That's not a sacrifice. That's the best deal I ever made." Alessandra leaned against his shoulder, feeling the solid warmth of him, the steady beat of his heart. "I love you," she said simply. "I love you too," he replied, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. "Both of you. More than I ever thought possible." Inside the house, they could hear the faint sound of Enzo talking in his sleep, probably dreaming about soccer games and science projects, and all the wonderfully ordinary adventures that filled his days. He was growing up to be exactly what they'd hoped, a normal kid with normal problems, untouched by the shadows of his father's past. "Raphael," Alessandra said softly, "thank you for choosing us, for choosing this life." "Thank you for coming back," he replied, "for giving me the chance to be the man you and Enzo deserved." They sat in comfortable silence, 2 people who had found their way back to each other and to the life they'd always wanted but never thought they could have. The Mafia boss who had once ruled Chicago's underworld was now just a husband and father, and that transformation, from power to love, from fear to peace, was the greatest victory of his life. In the distance, a church bell chimed the hour, marking another day in their new life, another step away from the past and toward the future they were building together, one ordinary, precious moment at a time.